So what is terrorism? Under Section 1 of the Terrorism Act 2000, the term terrorism means the use or threat of action where the action falls within subsection 2, which is below. The use or threat is designed to influence the government or an international governmental organisation, or to intimidate the public or a section of the public. And the use or threat is made for the purpose of advancing a political, religious, racial or ideological cause. Under subsection 2, action falls within this subsection if it involves serious violence against a person, involves serious damage to property, endangers a person's life other than that of the person committing the action, creates a serious risk to the health and safety of the public or section of the public, or is designed seriously to interfere with or seriously to disrupt an electronic system. The use or threat of action falling within subsection 2, which involves the use of firearms or explosives, is terrorism whether or not subsection 1b is satisfied. So the main parts of this part of the definition is that there needs to be some form of violence or damage which is serious. It should endanger someone's life, but not the person who's carrying out these actions. And then it should also create a serious risk to the health and safety of the public at large or a smaller section of that public. And if it disrupts an electronic system, so arguably if a scammer was hacking into an online system as part of a terrorism organisation or terrorist activities, then that would technically come under this definition. In relation to Palestine, conveying a message personally in relation to a topic such as the war would not come under this definition of terrorism, in my opinion, unless it involves some form of indictable criminal offence. Indictable meaning really serious, and that could be violence, damage to property, or risks to the health and safety of the public. But sharing that an opinion online or directly helping individuals in need cannot ordinarily be defined as terrorism according to this legislation. And indeed, if you are helping someone in need, whether that's Palestinians or whoever else, that's not really endangering other people's lives, I would argue. And so it's questionable whether it could be argued it would come into this section. But section 1 continues under subsection 4, and it says that in this section, action includes action outside the United Kingdom. So if you did go to a different country, wherever that is in the world, and you carry out some form of action, which under this definition of terrorism would be a terrorist activity, then you can still be liable in the United Kingdom. A reference to any person or to property is a reference to any person or to property wherever situated. So again, that personal property can be anywhere. A reference to the public includes a reference to the public of a country other than the United Kingdom. And the government means the government of the United Kingdom, or of a part of the United Kingdom, or of a country other than the United Kingdom. And in this act, a reference to action taken for the purposes of terrorism includes a reference to action taken for the benefit of a prescribed organisation. And so essentially what this means is that any action which causes violence, risk of health and safety, or interference with systems in relation to political, religious, racial or ideological causes can still lead to prosecution in England and Wales, even if these actions take place in another country. So this legislation here is part of many examples where it doesn't have to be committed in the country in question, i.e. England and Wales, for it to be punished or prosecuted in this country. It's similar with murder, for instance, or other homicide. You can still be tried in England and Wales, even if you commit murder in a different country altogether. And so that's something really key to remember. You are not protected if you carry out actions in relation to this legislation in other countries. But let's explore this definition in a bit more detail by applying it to a problem example. So, in the first part, the Freedom Front began as an underground movement aiming to forcibly disrupt what it called ecocide by government neglect. Its activities have included targeted attacks on oil company vehicles, training activists at the entrances of corporate offices, and damaging machinery used in new fossil fuel projects. Their online materials frequently contain messages encouraging people to defy the law, disrupt the system, and dismantle the infrastructure of destruction. In interviews and social media posts, spokespeople for the group have openly stated that their tactics are intended to pressure the government by causing fear and economic pain, which they argue is necessary to prevent environmental collapse. And so, let's see if this can meet the definition of terrorism under Section 1 of the Terrorism Act 2000. So, it needs to involve a use of threat, which is designed to influence the government or to intimidate the public or a section of the public. So, because it's or and not and, it can either influence the government or instead intimidate the public, or instead intimidate a section of the public. And so, if we look at here, there is evidence that they are trying to influence the government. So, its activities have included targeting attacks on oil companies, damaging machinery, defy the law, disrupt the system, and in interviews, here it is, they are intended to pressure the government. Excuse my dodgy highlighting, but this is the key term here which we'd want to look at and explore more in a fuller answer of the problem question. So the first part of this legislation is satisfied, I would argue, because that could be argued to be influencing the government. Now it needs to involve serious violence against the person. I don't think we've got evidence of that at a glance of this problem, but involves serious damage to property, which I would argue we do. For instance, targeted attacks on oil company vehicles, damaging machinery as well. So there's a few areas there. Endangers a person's life other than that of the person committing the action. I don't think there's any endangerment of life in here, but obviously alternative interpretations are allowed and a big part of law. Creates a serious risk to the health or safety of the public or section of the public. Arguably that could be argued here. Define the law, for instance, disrupting the system, dismantle the infrastructure. That could all be evidence of risk in the health and safety. Seriously interfere with or seriously disrupt an electronic system. Disrupt the system and dismantle the infrastructure, for instance. And the use of threat, by they are forcibly disrupting, so I'd say that would come under threat. And I think there's also other examples there as well. Action is in reference to any personal property and wherever situated. Well, all of this is happening in the UK, we're going to assume. And so, Section 3 would allow prescription where the Secretary of State believes an organisation is concerned in terrorism. And so, when we look at the methods of the Freedom Front, they are aiming to influence the government, and they are sabotaging, they are intimidating, and so it looks like it is highly likely that the Freedom Front would satisfy the Section 1 definition of terrorism. By contrast, however, the Green Another movement called the Green Uprising has pursued similar climate goals through civil disobedience. Its members have conducted peaceful occupations of petrol stations and banks, handed out anti-fossil fuel leaflets, and staged flash mob performances criticising the Freedom Front's proscription. The group has also launched a campaign arguing that the Freedom Front's ban amounts to a direct attack on freedom of conscience and the right to protest. Some members of the Green Uprising have taken to wearing green jumpsuits with the movement's logo, prompting public complaints that they are attempting to intimidate by appearance. So, by contrast, Green Uprising is committed to non-violent civil disobedience, and so this doesn't automatically satisfy the Section 1 threshold for terrorism, and instead I would suggest that we'd want to look at the law of protest instead. But we can probably conclude that the prescription of the Freedom Front is likely unlawful, whereas this, the Green Uprising, is likely not going to be unlawful under Section 1 because of their differences in tactics. And we're now going to look at this using another real-world example. So, Palestine Action have been known to sabotage property, for instance, red paint resembling blood thrown on buildings, scaling factory roofs and disabling machinery, graffiti and damage to Albit Systems premises, and damage of around £7 million to military aircraft. Whereas the Provisional IRA, Irish Republican Army, were engaged in bombings, including the Birmingham pub bombings in 1974, assassinations, including the attempted assassination of Lord Mountbatten in 1979, and attacks on military police and civilians both in Northern Ireland and on the British mainland. And so there's a bit of a distinction to be drawn here. These are two cases where these organisations have been proscribed, both at different times. So the Provisional IRA appears to be much more serious and seems to present a much more serious threat to the public, i.e. bombings and assassinations and attacks. Whereas Palestine Action, could that be argued just to be protesting going a step too far, especially with the first three? Yes, that likely satisfies the definition of terrorism, for instance damaging property and trying to influence the government, which is the aim of Palestine Action. And I think the damage of the aircraft is probably one of the biggest reasons why the government thought that Palestine Action needed to be proscribed. But it's worth mentioning, has the Home Secretary who would have proscribed Palestine Action gone a step too far? Did Palestine Action really present a danger? And is it just to proscribe them as an organisation? Is the law in this area right? Was the law in this area right to prescribe Palestine Action? And this is a start of where we might want to look at the critical analysis part of this lecture. What, in your opinion, was the right approach? Is this the right approach? I won't say what I think, but I'll leave it open to you, and do let me know in the comments section as well.